Welcome. Welcome to Life Giving Leaders. Every Wednesday at this time, we are live talking about different elements of what life-giving leadership looks like. We're your hosts, Michael and Dana. You can guess which is which. Dana is the beautiful one. Michael is the bearded one. And today we have a very cool topic. We are talking about productivity and time management, but from an angle that you might never have considered. So the title for today is Deadlines versus Lifelines, leveraging time as a productivity tool. So that's right, time is a tool. So let's talk about this for a second. Now, we're going to reference a couple of interesting things. We're going to obviously reference, we always want to keep things practical. The first part of our conversation today is going to be a little bit theoretical just to give us language for our discussion, all right? And we're actually going to reference Genesis 1 from the Bible. Now, don't worry, you don't have to be a Bible believer for this to make sense or for you to even get practical value out of it. But what we're going to do is we're going to learn from this some productivity tips because that creation account was extremely productive and we all live in it today. And so we actually want to learn some time management and productivity tips from this. All right. So deadlines versus lifelines. I mean, we're all accountable for being productive. And what do I mean by being productive? We can think of productivity as simply how much value a person is able to produce within an allocated amount of time. How much value we can produce within an allocated amount of time. If that's how we think about productivity, then the time allocation is the constraint. And when we're up against a deadline, we tend to think of time as almost an enemy. Or maybe not an enemy, that's not the right way. Maybe as a limited resource. I don't have enough time. I need more time. I wish I had more time. And so we call it a deadline, which isn't very inspiring. It's actually kind of terrifying. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, this is the point at which dead happens. So I prefer the language lifeline because we think of time, if we think of time as a resource, as a tool that we can utilize both as individuals and as leaders enabling our teams, then we can actually leverage it as a tool and partner with it, and it becomes useful, not the thing that we're going to run out of. And so I want to actually look at the origin of time. And so we'll have a little bit of theoretical exploration from here, but we're going to look at Genesis 1 in a way that you might never, ever have considered. And so let's take a look at this. We know the biblical account of creation was that everything was created in the sixth day, and then on the seventh day there was rest. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly read this so we all have the same point of reference, and we're going to mine out of this 5 productivity tips that we can each apply in our own spheres of influence, in our own workplaces, so that we can be uber productive, know where to focus and prioritize, and deliver value within an allocated amount of time. We'll also, if time permits, no pun intended, have a little bit of dialogue around how do you set up your teams to be productive and in a coordinated way together. All right. So in Genesis 1 here, I'm just going to start at verse 3. Genesis 1, verse 3. And it says, "And God said, let there be light. And there was light." Don't you wish we could all be that productive? We just say it and it happens. There's your tip number 1. No, I'm just kidding. But this is what happens in this account. Let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. I'm just going to read maybe the first 4 days here. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear, and it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation. plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seeds in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. I'm not going to continue reading because I think we've read enough to get the point across. We've read 3 days worth where we saw here that God here, think about God not as a religious figure for this conversation. Think about God as an entrepreneur creating something from the ground up that is built to last. Think of God as an entrepreneur building something from scratch that is built to last. This is the context and the lens through which we want to read this and learn. All right. So throughout the 3 days that I read, and had I kept reading, we would have seen the same pattern. There is actually a pattern to how he orders his day. Now, for those literalists out there, I already know, and we're going to call out the fact that these days are not 24-hour periods. We know this because had I kept reading into day 4, it would have been the creation of the solar system. And we measure 24-hour periods based on the solar system.
We also know that based on the Hebrew, because the Hebrew word yom is not limited to a 24-hour period. So,
right.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about literal 24-hour periods, but we are talking about any given day where which you actually define a period and call it day 1, day 2, day 3, any defined period of time whereby you want to be productive and accomplish something within it. So what are some productivity tips that we learn? What are some of the patterns that we see in how God makes sure he's productive? Because watch what he did. He was productive, and then on day 6, he creates Adam and Eve. He builds his team. He recruits his teams, if you would, and then he enables them to be productive. So let's first talk about how we as leaders can be productive. And then if time permits, we'll talk about how we can enable our teams too. Tip number one, okay? Know your single greatest focus for the day. Oh, I want to touch on this for a minute because at the beginning of each day, God said, let us such and such. In other words, he's saying, my focus for the day, or he refers to himself in the plural, our focus for the day is so-and-so. Now, I want to highlight this. There is exactly one focus at a time. He's not multitasking. I mean, if God himself, who is omnipresent, omnipotent, and all-knowing, is not multitasking but is focused, how much more ought we to be focused? Focus. So multitasking, don't put it on your resumes. Don't put it on your job descriptions. Do not make it a requirement. The better, more valuable thing is the ability to prioritize and focus and get a thing done really, really well. And so number one, know your single greatest focus for the day. And again, when I say day, this is also true for a week or for a quarter or for a month. It's just the broader the period of time, the more vague the focus may be. You might have a thematic focus for your month, for example, or for your quarter, or even for your year. But if you're planning your day, you have a very tactical focus. Number two, define what good looks like. So I'm not just getting the thing done, I'm getting the thing done well. I'm specific. I'm giving it a name. I'm saying what it's going to look like, how it's going to operate. I'm defining what good looks like. And that's important because it tees up principle number 3. Review your work output. Review it and compare it to what? Compare it to the standard you declared when you defined what good looks like. And so this morning I say, here's my focus for the day, and here's what good looks like in terms of what I will have accomplished by the end of the day. And at the end of the day, I look at what I said, and I said, in comparing what I've accomplished today to what I said I wanted to accomplish this morning, did I check that box? And if he looked at it and he said, yes, I checked the box, I accomplished what I said that I would, then he would say, it is good. He says, and God saw, which means he's looking at it, and he saw that it was good. What does he mean by good? It means it matches what I had set out to do at the beginning of the day. Well, you say, well, of course it was good. It's God. He's not going to do something not good. Well, actually, on day 6, when he created man and hadn't yet brought forth woman, he looked and said, it is not good. What? He said it's not good? He did. Why did he say it's not good? Because in the morning of day 6, God says, let us, plural, make man in our own image. Plural. And he looks at man, singular, and says, oh, it's not good. Because this morning I said, let us, plural, and I'm looking at man and he's singular. I got to pluralize man. And so he pulls out of man, Eve, now there's relationship, now there's team, now there's diversity. And he looks and says, aha, very good. Now it's good. Now I can move on to day 7. And so the point is you're proof checking your work at the end of the day according to the standard, the definition of good you declared in the morning. And if it's not good, then you adjust.
Mm.
And so clarity on what good is. Number 4, celebrate your win. God actually declared a day finished before he moved on to the next day. And so that's a way of celebrating, saying, all right, I fulfilled the thing that I said to. Pat on the back, little daps, little celebration, and then move on. You want to acknowledge that because you want to motivate yourself. You want to build on that momentum. You want to see the goodness. You don't want to feel like you're always catching up, but you want to celebrate what you've accomplished so you can move on to the next accomplishment, which is number 5. Move on to the next day. Rinse and repeat steps 1 to 4. So what are they again? Know your single greatest focus for the day. Number 2, define what good looks like. Number 3, review your work output to see whether you fulfilled that goodness. And number 4, celebrate your progress or your wins for that day. 5, rinse and repeat 1 through 4.
Yeah, so that's really good. So there's a few things that I wanted to touch on there. So when you're talking about the view of time, I think a really important conversation in this, it can actually be anxiety, because if we're viewing time as an enemy, or if we're looking at things as deadlines and those different things, it can be very anxiety inducing.
Yeah.
And our best productivity comes when we are present and in the moment, when we're present and in the moment.
Okay.
You know, our brains are able to be the most creative in that state. Just neurologically, we're in a great place. And for those of us who are Christians also, this is when we can enter into that conversation with God. You know, it talks about praying continually in the Bible. That means just talking to God throughout the day about what we're doing while we're doing it, like not doing it alone, but accessing that greater power. And Christian or non-Christian, it's fascinating because they found that our brains are actually wired to always be in conversation with a third party. So there is that kind of even biological support to, you know, when you're being present in the moment and you're not in fight, flight, or freeze because you're feeling anxious or you're trying to rush to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, where you're able now to actually be in that conversation, make mindful decisions which cause you to be productive, which cause your native genius to flourish. And you're not just kind of doing things because the environment is demanding them, but you're bringing out the best of what you're able to bring to the table. When you talk about celebration, celebrating the wins along the way, celebrating just finishing something along the way. Well, again, when we look at this aspect of anxiety, which I think is really eats up so much of time, which is why I'm talking about it, because I think that we make bad decisions when we're in that state. It's an enemy of productivity for sure. What they have also neurologically found, you cannot be grateful or be celebrating or be in a mindset of celebration and anxiety at the same time. So if you're kind of tottering towards that like place, if you're just like, be grateful. And if you create this pattern of, you know, I'm going to be grateful throughout the day. I'm going to be grateful that I accomplished this. I'm going to celebrate that I did this or that. I'm going to celebrate that I have this or that. Then your like home, your emotional home, your mental home is a place of peace, rest, productivity, native genius, allowing yourself to arise. And then the last thing you said is move on to your next focus. Move on to your next focus. And do you want to get into the rhythms conversation yet, or did you have something else you wanted to talk about before we went there?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to get into rhythms, but I'd love to go a little deeper on what you're calling out about anxiety and celebration,
Okay.
because I'm really glad that you're mentioning this, because I'm kind of talking about like some tactical ways to structure your day, but the reality is it's a lot of the stuff that goes on in here
Yeah.
that hinders productivity. the major things that hinder productivity aren't actually scheduling issues. I'm really good at planning. I'm really good at budgeting. I'm really good at scheduling. The question is, how's my execution according to those plans, right? And a lot of times that's what's going on in here. I had an interesting experience that actually surprised me about what happened inside of myself was God answered a major breakthrough for us, a big prayer. He answered a prayer for us, a major breakthrough. And you guess what I started to feel? Anxiety. Wait a minute, Mike, you're saying God answered prayer and it
Right.
induced anxiety? Yeah, that's what happened. Now, I'm not saying God induced anxiety, but I felt anxiety when the prayer was answered, when the greater responsibility came. I felt anxious. I felt afraid, and it surprised me actually. You'd think I would have just felt happy and just celebrate and thankful, but I actually felt more anxious than thankful. And so, what did I have to do? I had to process, why am I feeling this anxiety? What is it that I'm afraid of in the future? Because, I think Ed Silvoso defines anxiety as something when you're afraid of something in the future.
Right.
And so, well, what is it that I'm afraid of? What if I mess this up? What if whatever it is? Once I processed that, I was able to enter into gratitude. Once I entered into gratitude, I was able to enter into the moment undistracted, enjoy the work, and be productive.
Right. So this is actually, and this, for me, this flows into the rhythms conversation very much, because I think one of the ways you stay in a mentally healthy place is the rhythms you create in your life. And I was really kind of looking at the different rhythms that I create in my life. So there are things that are absolutely non-negotiable in any season, irregardless what the season I'm in. My morning routine's not negotiable. My Sabbath or one day of rest is not negotiable. The family time we have in the evenings and on the weekends, not negotiable, right? So there's some things that are just always on, right? But then I found actually from season to season in my work life, I do shift in terms of the way I manage time. And you need to recognize your seasons and you need to recognize what's needed in those seasons. So some seasons in my work life, if it's not in the calendar, it doesn't exist. Like it's just this and this and this and this and this, and you follow the calendar. But in other seasons where it's maybe a transitionary season or a season of creativity, moving into a new venture, those types of seasons I find are more fluid, like I'll follow the day, as opposed to having it so firmly mapped out in the calendar. So I don't ascribe to the aspect of there's only one way to do things, because even personally, I think season to season, for each individual it's different also, right? So for you, maybe you've got your one way of doing things and that is the system that works for you. But the important thing about systems is they have to be systems that serve you. They have to serve you in the time and season and you're in. And what served you yesterday may not serve you today, may not serve you tomorrow. Even in my non-negotiables, even in non-negotiables like a morning routine, for example, the different varying aspects of the morning routine might change. Like you mentioned, moving on to your next focus and repeat. Well, I always have a part of my morning routine that's about cutting from the past and moving forward, because we're always growing and we're always moving forward. And that part of the morning routine would entail, for those of you who are our clients, doing a 9-week, or doing one of actually Dr. Ed Silvoso's 40 days, or one of Dr. Carolyn Leaf's 63 days. And that actually shifts from season to season, which one of those is on. But that's the part of my morning routine that's a non-negotiable. There's always one of those going.
And when you refer to the 63-day or the 9-week or the 40 days, you're referring to mindset work.
Yeah, mindset work, removing limiting beliefs, removing neurological structures in your brain that have been disabling your productivity. Because again, remember, we're talking about time and productivity. We're talking about how to get the maximum amount of your time and how to make the maximum impact in this world in the time that you have, right? So that's a non-negotiable. Something meditative. I love like worship, reading the Bible. Something meditative is like always a part of that morning routine. But then there's other aspects that change from season to season. The degree of declaration in that morning routine will change. Sometimes it's a really like heavy, long, detailed declaration. Sometimes it's just one sentence I'm throwing up. The degree of envisioning, which I think is a really, really, really important practice. Envisioning is so powerful. It's actually part of the 9-week process too. That will change how much of that is in the morning routine from season to season. But having a morning routine that stabilizes you in who you are and what you are and when and where you are and why you are right now is essential to everyone. That the pieces may change, but having it is not a negotiable.
Really good. You know, I used to look at some leaders that I really look up to, and I was like, man, these folks have really good morning routines. They'd get up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and they would do like an 8-kilometer jog every day. And I'm not even exaggerating. And they have their workout, and then they maybe read for a while. They do the mindset work, they do the meditation, they do all that. And I'm like, feeling completely inadequate because I'm just having a hard time getting up on time in the morning because I just was not so much a morning person. So if you're listening to this and you start to feel guilty and you're like, I'm just not a morning person, start with your natural rhythm wherever you're at. There are special things about doing things in the morning neurologically, but in terms of like, look, if you want to work out, for example, and you're not getting up early enough in the morning, okay, do it at night. I do most of my exercise at night. So just be able to work within your flow.
Yeah, let me just talk about that. Yeah, morning routine doesn't have to be at 4 in the morning. And again, this it can be seasonal. You know, I was having like you could have your morning routine at 10 in a particular season because that works for you. But then in another season, that does not work. And you need more time and you need to move it to that 6 a.m. time slot. Again, these things are seasonal. You need to work with where you are, who you are, what you are in this moment, in this season. And you need to be aware of that. You know, sometimes we just go with the flow and not take stock. And it's important to kind of have that awareness because even being able to zoom out to the big picture really has a very, very powerful effect on your ability to handle the everyday challenges of the projects or just the life that you're living, you know, and helps you maximize time and helps you avoid anxiety, which we really feel is a huge enemy of time. Yeah.
Yeah, a good example of when you might consider shifting your rhythm or redesigning it, if you're a parent and it's summertime, and then in September your kids start school. Well, maybe you have to redesign your patterns to make sure that you know you're enabling their patterns as well. I want to talk a little bit about how we think about productivity, because remember, we defined at the beginning of this conversation productivity as how we are able to add value within an allocated amount of time. You're productive when you can add a certain amount of value within a certain amount of time, right? The word productivity comes from obviously the word producing, right? You're able to produce value within a certain amount of time. And so the question then becomes in how we think about productivity, are we limiting ourselves in how we think about how we're adding value? Because when I'm creating value, implied in the thinking of value is the value I'm producing is for someone else. So if I'm looking at if I'm judging my productivity, if my definition of good as it pertains to my productivity, my ability to add value is only internal, if it's only about what did I get done for myself, then maybe I'm being a little bit myopic in how I'm thinking about value. For example, if I set out something in the day and I need to get something done, if I'm just looking at it as I need to get it done so that I can say I got it done and check it off my list. I love checking things off my list. It just feels good.
It's very good psychologically to check things off your list.
It is. I've had times when I did something and it wasn't on my list, so I added it to the list just so I could check it off. But the point is, I just want to get. Okay, so the point is, it's not just about me getting it done so I can get it done. The question I want to ask myself is, what value will getting this done add to someone else? So when at the end of the day I celebrate that value, I'm not just celebrating what I accomplished. I'm celebrating the value that that someone else or those other people have received as a result. And that's really helpful because sometimes the plan you set out in the day is going to have to shift.
Yeah.
Something happened that you didn't expect. And maybe I didn't accomplish the exact thing I had set out to for that day. But the point is, I'll stay focused on it until I am able to accomplish it. And I can even celebrate the adjustment that I had to make. Why? Because chances are it may be that I made that adjustment so that somebody else could benefit and gain value. What does that mean? It means I was productive.
Yes. Let's talk about the lists because I have
Let's go
a
there.
million lists going as a business lady and a mother and all the things, right? So you want your list to serve you. You do not want to serve your list. You don't want to be a slave to the list so that you're looking at the list. And if the list isn't 100% done by the end of the day, you feel horrible. That is not a good use of your list. You want to keep your lists fluid. Like you have the lists of the things that need to get done. It's not time stamped. So if it doesn't all get done today, you're not feeling bad about it. But these are the things that need to get done. And then if you do want to kind of set some boundaries for yourself of productivity for the day, just say, okay, what needs to get done on this list to say that I won today? And it could be one or two things, not the entire list. You know what I mean? Like, and that way your list is serving you and you celebrate every time you mark something off your list. You do not use that list as a form of punishment. If it is not completed, then the list, you are becoming a slave to the list. The list is not a tool that's serving you in that situation.
Really good. Really good. I mean, I have a list. There's a whiteboard right there. I have a list that's got 10 to 12 things on it. But at the beginning of every day, I go and I circle one thing.
Right. That's it.
Maybe two, but I try to keep it to one. And I finish the one and I check it off and I do a little dance and then I move on to the next thing. And so, in fact, sometimes I'll even erase the rest of the stuff or hide the list. Or if you're using an app or a tool, you can collapse it or expand it or whatever, just so you're staying focused. I'm not mentally distracted by the other things that I have to eventually get to. I'm just in the zone. I'm in the zone.
Right. And actually, even if you're finding yourself in a place where you need to, maybe you want to increase your joy, maybe you can have things on that list like laugh half an hour today, like things that are, and those are huge accomplishments because the biological, the mental, the way that they actually show up in you makes you exceedingly more productive than if you don't have those kind of self-care things on your list and those targeted things that you and your are working on yourself and you're not working on yourself because, okay, again, even when we're doing kind of mindset work and stuff, you don't start from a place of, I'm not good enough or I'm dead. Like, that's not where you're starting. You're awesome the way you are. We're all working on things and this is going to serve me better. If this area functions like this, it's going to serve me better. So how can I now work on that area,
Beautiful. All right. Well, listen, we're going to get ready to go into the membership room right now. Those of you in the Zoom room, you know who you are. If you are a member, please use the Zoom link to join, which you would already have. If you're curious about being a member, you can just click the link in the description below. And here's an ask of you. If you're getting value out of these conversations, why not invite somebody for the next one? Get some popcorn, have a little bit of a watch party or whatever you want to call it over Zoom. 30 minutes every Wednesday, 12 o'clock Eastern or 9 Pacific. You just pop it in your calendar. You come to the same link, hannastrategy.com/live. Invite some others with you and maybe have a conversation with them afterwards and kind of talk about what am I taking from this? How do I apply it, etc. Or even better, join our members conversation where we have those very discussions afterwards. And it's easy to become a member. Again, just go to hannastrategy.com/leaders or click the link in the description. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And members, we will see you in the Zoom room.
So bye, YouTube audience. We loved having you. Great to see you this morning. And members, we're about to come into our conversation.
All right. All right. Those of you in the Zoom